Elena Harper sat at the worn wooden counter of the Hearth, a small diner on Willow Creek's main street, her dark blue jacket blending into the morning crowd. At 42, she carried the weight of Atlanta's rougher edges, where she'd grown up watching her father, a bus driver, shrink under the glares of cops who stopped him for looking suspicious on his own route. Those memories, sharp as broken glass, had driven her to the Atlanta PD, then away from it when her reports on racial profiling were buried under insufficient evidence. Now, after 3 years of quiet, she was back, not as a detective, but as Willow Creek's undercover chief of police, tasked with rooting out the rot in a department that hid behind its small-town charm. The Hearth smelled of burnt coffee and fresh biscuits, its faded sign promising home in every bite. To an outsider, Willow Creek was all Southern hospitality, maple-lined streets, white picket fences, and a quiet that felt like peace. But Elena knew better. Peaceful places often hid the worst secrets, and she'd come to find them. Her worn leather wallet rested on the counter, no badge, no gun, just a $5 bill and a purpose. She was here to watch, to listen, to see how this town treated someone like her, a black woman with no visible power. Across the counter, James Callahan leaned, his police uniform wrinkled from a long shift. At 35, he was broad-shouldered, with a jaw clenched tight to prove he was always in control. Raised in Willow Creek by a father who'd been a deputy, James had learned early that order meant keeping certain people in line. His marriage was crumbling, his career stalled, but his badge gave him something to hold on to, a shield for his insecurities. He glanced at Elena, his eyes narrowing with a look that said, "Stay where you belong." Internal reports, long buried, painted him clearly: 15 complaints for racial slurs, excessive force, and humiliating minorities, none investigated. Yet, he'd been promoted, clapped on the back, called a keeper of the peace. Elena's voice was steady, cutting through the diner's hum. "Can I get a bottle of water, please?" Before the barista could move, James sneered, "Need ID for that?" His tone wasn't a question, it was a dare. Elena met his gaze, unflinching. "Just water." The room stilled. Spoons clinked, but eyes stayed down. Then, with a flick of his wrist, James tossed a full bottle of cold water at her face. It hit with a sharp splash, soaking her jacket, dripping from her chin. "No ID, no place here," he said, voice low and cruel. The diner froze, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They watched, then looked away, choosing silence over courage. Elena wiped her face with a handkerchief, her hands steady despite the sting of humiliation. She remembered her father's face after a cop's insult, the way he'd lower his head to protect her from seeing his shame. She wouldn't do the same. Not here, not now. She placed the $5 bill on the counter, took a new bottle from the barista, who hesitated before sliding it over, and walked out. No words, no scene, just a silence heavier than the water on her skin. Outside, the morning light hit the wet pavement, and Elena's breath caught, not from the cold but from a fire kindling inside her. She didn't know a teenage girl, Lily, had recorded it all from a corner booth, her phone trembling but steady. That clip, uploaded by noon, would hit 10,000 views in an hour, splitting Willow Creek between outrage and denial. For Elena, it wasn't just proof of James's cruelty, it was proof of a town that let it happen. As she walked to her rental, the bottle still sealed in her hand, she felt the weight of her father's unavenged dignity and her daughter Maya's future. This wasn't just a test. It was the start of a reckoning. Elena Harper sat in her motel room, the dim light of her laptop casting shadows across the peeling wallpaper. The viral video of James Callahan's attack played on a loop, each splash of water a reminder of why she'd come to Willow Creek. At 42, she'd seen enough to know one officer's cruelty wasn't the problem, it was the system that let him thrive. Her father's face flashed in her mind, the way he'd clench his fists after a cop's taunt, never speaking but always carrying the weight. Elena had sworn her daughter, Maya, would never know that silence. Tonight, she opened a thick envelope from the Georgia Department of Internal Affairs, marked with a red stamp, Chief Elena Harper, investigate racial bias, Willow Creek PD, 6 months, Level 3 clearance. The file listed James Callahan as Priority 1. At 35, he was a hometown hero to some, with a record of 15 complaints, racial slurs, excessive force, public humiliation, all dismissed. Elena traced the pattern back to Robert Hensley, a former review director who'd signed off on every buried report. She remembered Hensley from her Atlanta days, his smooth voice shutting down her inquiries with, "You're right, Harper, but you'll break the system." Now, in Willow Creek, his name was everywhere, a gatekeeper protecting men like Callahan. Elena's fingers moved over her keyboard, logging her first entry, Day 1, Subject Callahan, Public Racial Harassment, No Provocation. Objective, Map Systemic Enablers. She paused, the water's cold sting still fresh, but her resolve was iron. Her daughter's laughter from a recent call echoed, Maya, 3, asking, "Mama, when you coming home?" Elena had whispered, "Soon, baby, when it's right." This was for her father, for every voice silenced by a badge. The next morning, Elena visited Clara Mendoza, a 38-year-old nurse's aide who'd faced Callahan's wrath in 2019. Clara's apartment was small, a photo of her son, Diego, in a football jersey on the wall. Her eyes were wary, but Elena's calm presence softened them. "I filed a report," Clara said, voice tight. "He called me trash at the bus stop, said I was ruining America." Diego saw it all. No one listened. Elena nodded, seeing her own father's pain in Clara's clenched hands. "I'm listening now," she said, placing a recorder on the table. Clara's story poured out, humiliation, fear, silence, each word a thread in Elena's growing tapestry of evidence. Later, Elena met Nathan Brooks, 30, a former officer who'd saved a child from a fire but saw Callahan take the credit. Nathan's eyes were heavy with anxiety, his voice rough. "I ran into that house, heard the kid crying. Callahan showed up late, but they gave him the medal. His mother's wrongful arrest years ago had pushed him to join the force, only to be burned by its betrayal." Elena wrote every detail, her heart aching for Nathan's stolen valor, her mind sharpening for the fight ahead. The viral video was now at 50,000 views, comments flooding in, "This is 1960s all over again," and "He's just doing his job." Elena didn't watch it again. She didn't need to. The town's silence that day in the hearth told her enough, complicity ran deeper than one man. As she closed her laptop, Maya's voice rang in her ears, a reminder of why she couldn't waver. This wasn't just about Callahan. It was about a system that let him throw water and walk away, and Elena was here to make sure it never happened again. The air in Willow Creek felt heavier now, as if the viral video had cracked open a truth the town could no longer ignore. Elena Harper walked the quiet streets, her dark jacket blending into the dusk, but her presence was anything but invisible. The clip of James Callahan throwing water at her in the hearth had exploded to 100,000 views, shared across platforms with hashtags like #WillowCreekShame. Comments ranged from fury, "How is this man still a cop?" to defense, "She must have provoked him." Elena didn't read them. She didn't need the internet to tell her what she'd felt, the cold splash, the diner's silence, the weight of her father's unvoiced pain from decades ago. In her motel room, Elena pored over internal records, her Level 3 clearance unlocking a digital vault of buried complaints. James Callahan's file was a litany of abuse, 15 complaints, from slurs at traffic stops to shoving a black teenager against a wall. Each dismissed with phrases like, insufficient evidence or subject resisted. Robert Hensley's signature appeared on 12, a quiet nod to a system that protected its own. Elena's heart tightened, remembering her Atlanta days when Hensley had dismissed her own reports with a patronizing smile. She typed into her log, Day 3, systemic cover-up confirmed. Hensley key enabler. She visited Nathan Brooks again, this time at a rundown coffee shop on the town's edge. Nathan, 30, sat hunched, his eyes scanning the room like a man expecting ambush. "I tried to speak up," he said, voice low. "After the fire, I told HR Callahan didn't save that kid. They said I was unstable, pushed me to retire." His mother's arrest when he was a teen had driven him to the force, hoping to be the cop who'd listen. Instead, he'd been erased. Elena's pen moved fast, capturing his words, her resolve hardening. "You're not erased anymore," she told him, her voice steady but warm. Nathan's nod was small, but it carried the weight of a man reclaiming his truth. Clara Mendoza's story echoed in Elena's mind as she drove back. Clara's son, Diego, had seen Callahan's cruelty, his young eyes carrying a scar Elena knew too well from her own childhood. She called Maya that night, her daughter's giggle a lifeline. "Mama, you catch the bad guys yet?" Maya asked. Elena smiled, throat tight. "Working on it, baby." She hung up, the memory of her father's clenched fists fueling her. This wasn't just about her, it was about making sure Diego, Maya, and others never had to feel that shame. The town was splitting. At the hearth, whispers followed Elena's every step, some angry, some curious. A young barista, Jaden, met her eyes with a nod, as if apologizing for the diner's past. Online, the video sparked protests, small, but loud, outside the police station. Callahan had taken emergency leave, citing stress, but Elena knew better. He was running from a truth she was uncovering, piece by piece. As she closed her laptop, a new email pinged, an anonymous tip, a leaked memo signed by Hensley, dismissing another complaint. Elena's pulse quickened. The fire was spreading, and she was ready to fan the flames. Willow Creek streets buzzed with tension, the viral video now at 250,000 views, its ripples tearing at the town's fragile facade. Elena Harper sat in her motel, the anonymous memo on her laptop screen, "Recommend dismissal, no grounds, R. Hensley." It was the 10th she'd found, each one a brick in the wall protecting James Callahan. At 42, Elena had seen this before, her Atlanta reports buried by men like Hensley, who'd told her, "You're stirring trouble, Harper." Now, in Willow Creek, she was done with warnings. Her daughter Maya's voice echoed in her mind, "Mama, you coming home soon?" And she typed into her log, Day 7, Network of Enablers expands. Hensley's role central. Elena met Clara Mendoza again, this time at a community library, its faded shelves a quiet refuge. Clara, 38, clutched a photo of Diego, her son, now 14, his eyes still haunted by Callahan's 2019 insults. "I told the station what he said," Clara whispered, "called me a leech in front of Diego. They said it was my word against his." Elena's jaw tightened, seeing her father's face in Clara's pain, the way he'd hide his shame after a cop's taunt. "Your word matters now," Elena said, her recorder capturing Clara's trembling voice. Each word was a stitch, mending a wound the system had ignored. The next day, Elena tracked down Nathan Brooks at his apartment, a cramped space smelling of stale coffee. Nathan, 30, showed her a faded report he'd written after the fire, detailing how Callahan stole his heroism. "They threatened my pension," he said, his anxiety etched in his hunched shoulders. Elena remembered her own fights in Atlanta, how speaking out cost her friends, promotions, peace. "You're not alone anymore," she told him, her voice firm but kind, noting his story for the federal report. Outside, Willow Creek was fracturing. Protests grew louder, signs reading, "Justice for the Hearth," dotting Main Street. Online, Callahan's defenders called the video edited, but the tide was turning. A young officer, Sarah Nguyen, 34, slipped Elena a USB with internal emails, Hensley's orders to bury complaints. Sarah's parents, Vietnamese immigrants, had taught her to stay quiet to survive, but her guilt over silence during Callahan's acts pushed her to act. "I should have spoken up," Sarah whispered. Elena nodded, seeing her younger self in Sarah's eyes. The pressure was mounting. Elena felt it in the stares at the hearth, the whispers in the precinct. Her father's voice rang in her ears, "Don't let them break you, Lena." She wouldn't. As she prepared for the oversight hearing, Maya's giggle from their last call grounded her. The storm was here, and Elena was ready to face it, not for herself, but for Clara, Nathan, Sarah, and every voice the system tried to drown. The Northfield Regional Center's meeting room was stark, its frosted glass walls muting the gray Georgia sky. Elena Harper, 42, stood at the podium, her charcoal blazer sharp against the room's dullness. The viral video of James Callahan's water-throwing assault had hit 500,000 views, and Willow Creek was a tinderbox, protests outside the precinct, social media ablaze with #JusticeForElena. Inside, 6 oversight officials faced her, their faces a mix of skepticism and unease. Elena's heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of her father's silenced pain and her daughter Maya's future. She opened her file, Callahan's 15 complaints laid bare, and began. 3 days ago, an officer was set to receive a Medal of Valor, she said, voice steady. Yesterday, I confirmed he didn't earn it. Today, I'm here about a black woman humiliated in the hearth. The screen lit up, the video playing, Callahan's sneer, the water's splash, Elena's unflinching calm. The room froze. No one breathed. Callahan, in the third row, his uniform crisp, went pale, his usual smirk gone. Elena continued, "This isn't one mistake. It's a pattern, 15 complaints, all dismissed by Robert Hensley, who shielded a system that rewards bias." She shared Clara Mendoza's story, the 38-year-old mother whose son Diego still flinched at police sirens after Callahan's 2019 insults. She read Nathan Brooks' report, the 30-year-old ex-officer whose heroism was stolen, his anxiety a scar from a system that erased him. Elena's voice didn't waver, but her chest tightened, remembering her father's bowed head after a cop's slur. This system didn't break because of one man, she said. It broke because too many stayed silent. The officials shifted, some scribbling, others avoiding her gaze. Callum Bragg, the regional director, nodded slightly. "Proceed, Chief Harper." Elena laid out Hensley's role, his signatures on buried complaints, and Sarah Nguyen's leaked emails exposing the cover-up. Sarah, 34, sat in the back, her Asian American heritage once a reason to stay quiet, now a fire to speak. Elena didn't mention her name, protecting her ally, but felt Sarah's courage bolster her own. Callahan's hands clenched, his eyes darting. Elena met his gaze, her voice cutting through. "If I'd worn a badge that day, would you have acted differently? The issue isn't who I am, it's why respect depends on knowing my title." The room's silence was electric, a shift no one could ignore. By the end, Callahan was suspended, the order signed before he left the room. Elena walked out, her father's pride and Maya's laughter in her mind, knowing this was no victory, just the start of a reckoning. Willow Creek's air carried a new weight, as if the town was holding its breath after James Callahan's suspension. Elena Harper, 42, sat in her office, the 182-page federal report on her desk, Systemic Failure, the Callahan Case. It detailed 15 complaints, Robert Hensley's cover-ups, and a network of enablers. The video of Callahan's assault had reached 1 million views, and protests outside the precinct grew, with signs reading, "No more silence." Elena's heart was steady but heavy, her father's old wounds and Maya's innocent questions, "Mama, did you fix it?" driving her forward. Younger officers began to stir. Sarah Nguyen, 34, who'd sent Elena the leaked emails, met her in a quiet park. Sarah's parents, Vietnamese immigrants, had taught her to blend in, but her silence during Callahan's acts haunted her. "I was there once," she admitted, voice low. "He insulted a black kid, and I said nothing. I'm done with that." Elena saw her younger self in Sarah's guilt, the same shame she'd felt in Atlanta when her reports were ignored. "You're speaking now," Elena said, handing her a recorder. Sarah's story joined Clara's and Nathan's, a growing chorus of truth. Clara Mendoza, 38, spoke at a community meeting, her son Diego by her side. "Callahan called me trash in 2019, she said, her voice steady despite trembling hands. "I filed a report, but they buried it. I'm here for Diego, so he knows I fought." The room, filled with residents, didn't clap but listened, a shift from the diner's silence. Elena, in the back, wrote every word, her chest tight with Clara's courage, echoing her father's unspoken battles. Nathan Brooks, 30, shared his story online, a video detailing his erased heroism. "I saved a kid from a fire, but Callahan got the medal," he said, his anxiety raw but his resolve clear. The post spread, shared by officers who'd once stayed quiet. Elena watched, her hope tempered by fear of backlash. She remembered her Atlanta days, ostracized for speaking out, and worried for Sarah, Nathan, and Clara. But their voices were cracking the system's wall. The federal report led to Callahan's indictment, falsifying records, violating human rights. Hensley was subpoenaed, his excuses crumbling under oath. Elena's office received letters from officers, one reading, "I stayed silent to keep my job. No more." Sarah's tip had sparked a movement, and Elena felt a flicker of pride, not for herself but for them. As she closed her laptop, Maya's giggle rang in her ears, a reminder that this fight was for a future where no one had to hide their truth. Willow Creek was no longer the quiet town it had pretended to be. The hearth, once a place of silent complicity, now bore a new wooden sign outside, "Here, someone chose to stand." Jaden, the 28-year-old new owner, had hung it herself, her hands steady as she told the local paper, "This diner's got a past, and I won't pretend it doesn't." Elena Harper, 42, walked past the sign, her heart stirring with a cautious hope. The town was waking, but she knew change was fragile, like the green shoots breaking through Main Street's cracked sidewalks. The federal indictment against James Callahan, 35, had shaken the Willow Creek PD, charged with falsifying records and violating human rights. He stayed silent, his lawyer's defense, political conspiracy, fading against the weight of 12 interviews and 7 recordings. Robert Hensley, the former review director, faced subpoenas, his signatures on buried complaints now public. Elena's office was a hub of evidence, her desk covered with letters from victims and officers. One, from an anonymous cop, read, "I thought silence was loyalty. You showed me its betrayal." Elena's throat tightened, remembering her father's silenced pain, his fists clenched to hide his shame. Clara Mendoza, 38, spoke at a town hall, her son Diego, 14, watching proudly. "I was called trash for existing," she said. "I stayed quiet for Diego, but no more." The crowd listened, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Elena, in the back, saw her father's resilience in Clara's eyes, fueling her own resolve. Nathan Brooks, 30, joined a podcast, his voice steady despite his anxiety. "I saved a kid, not Callahan," he said. "The system erased me, but I'm here now." His story spread, shared by residents who'd once looked away. Sarah Nguyen, 34, met Elena at the hearth, her guilt easing into purpose. "My parents taught me to stay quiet," she said, "but I'm done hiding." Her leaked emails had cracked the system open, and now she helped Elena organize victim testimonies. The town's mood shifted, protests quieted, but conversations grew. A barista at the hearth handed Elena a free coffee, whispering, "I was there that day. I should have spoken." Elena nodded, her heart heavy with Maya's future and her father's past. As Elena walked back to her office, the sign at the hearth glowed under streetlights. Willow Creek wasn't healed, but it was stirring, learning to face its scars. Maya's voice echoed, "Mama, you fixed it?" And Elena whispered to herself, "Not yet, baby, but we're getting there." The awakening was slow, but it was real, and Elena wouldn't let it slip away. The Willow Creek Police Department felt like a house after a storm, still standing, but forever changed. Elena Harper, 42, sat in the Northfield Regional Center, appointed senior advisor to a new independent oversight committee. The 182-page report, Systemic Failure, the Callahan Case, lay on the table, its pages detailing James Callahan's abuses and Robert Hensley's cover-ups. Outside, Willow Creek's protests had quieted, but the town's pulse was different. Residents whispered about change, and the hearth sign, "Here, someone chose to stand," became a quiet beacon. Police Chief Thomas Reed, 50, resigned in a closed-door meeting, his voice weary. "I can't lead a system that denies truth every morning," he said, signing his resignation before stunned lieutenants. Elena, reading the press release in her office, felt no triumph, only clarity. Reed's exit wasn't about guilt, it was about a system that had grown too comfortable with silence. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his dignity stolen by cops like Callahan. She typed into her log, Day 120, Leadership Shift. Systemic change initiated. Clara Mendoza, 38, and Nathan Brooks, 30, became voices of the town's awakening. Clara spoke at a school assembly, Diego by her side, saying, "I was silenced, but my son won't be." Nathan's podcast interview hit 10,000 listens, his story of stolen heroism resonating. Sarah Nguyen, 34, now openly supported Elena, organizing a victim support group. "I was silent too long," Sarah told her, eyes fierce with purpose. Elena saw her younger self in Sarah, the Atlanta rookie who'd once swallowed her outrage to survive. The committee's first meeting was tense. A federal judge, Maria Cortez, led with a blunt truth, "We're here because silence failed." Elena presented the Circle 15 files, 15 complaints, each a life ignored. She shared a letter from a young officer, "I thought neutrality was safe. Now I know it's surrender." The room listened, no objections. Callahan's indictment expanded, with Hensley and 3 others subpoenaed. The system was cracking, not from loud protests but from quiet truths piling up. Elena returned to her office, Maya's voice in her ears, "Mama, you're a hero, right?" She smiled, heart aching. "Just doing what's right, baby." The fight wasn't over, but the system was shifting, forced to face its flaws. As she sealed the latest report, Elena felt her father's pride, a steady fire that no water could douse. Willow Creek was learning to listen, and she wouldn't let it turn back. Elena Harper's office in Willow Creek was bare now, her 6-month assignment nearing its end. The desk, once piled with files, held only a silver badge and a handwritten note, "I don't need to be remembered as right, just as someone who didn't look away." At 42, Elena felt the weight of her journey, every complaint uncovered, every voice restored, every memory of her father's silenced pain pushing her forward. The town had changed, not with fanfare but with quiet shifts, the hearth sign, "Here, someone chose to stand," and residents who no longer averted their eyes. The Oversight Committee's work continued, with James Callahan's trial looming and Robert Hensley's role under scrutiny. Elena had submitted the final 41-page report, its conclusion clear: a system doesn't change unless forced to see itself. Clara Mendoza, 38, now led a community group, her son Diego finding pride in her courage. Nathan Brooks, 30, had started mentoring young officers, his anxiety easing as his truth was heard. Sarah Nguyen, 34, stepped into Elena's role, her once silent voice now a steady force. Sarah's anonymous tip had sparked this reckoning, and Elena had recommended her in a letter to the committee. "She knows silence's cost and won't pay it again." Elena met Sarah at the hearth, the diner's warmth a stark contrast to that cold day 6 months ago. "You're ready," Elena said, handing her the Circle 15 files. Sarah's eyes, once shadowed by guilt, were clear. "I stayed quiet to survive," she said. "Now I'll speak to change things." Elena nodded, seeing her father's resilience in Sarah's resolve, her daughter Maya's future in this new beginning. Letters from victims filled Elena's desk, each a testament to her impact. One read, "You gave my story a place to exist." Another, from a young officer, I won't look away anymore. Elena taped them to the wall, a patchwork of voices no longer buried. She thought of Maya, 3, asking, Mama, did you win? Elena hadn't won, she'd started something. As she packed her badge, her heart was light, not with victory but with purpose fulfilled. Sarah would carry the torch, and Willow Creek would keep learning to listen. Spring sunlight filtered through Willow Creek's maple trees, casting soft shadows on the red brick pavement outside the hearth. Elena Harper, 42, stood there, her 3-year-old daughter, Maya, in her arms, curls bouncing as she pointed at the diner's wooden sign, Here, someone chose to stand. 6 months ago, Elena had walked into this diner, undercover, and faced James Callahan's cruelty, a bottle of water thrown in her face, a town's silence deafening. Now, she returned, not as Chief Harper, but as a mother, a daughter, a woman who'd changed a town. The hearth was different now. Jaden, the new owner, had repainted the walls, warm decals softening the space. A barista, a young man who'd been there that day, met Elena's eyes with a quiet nod, sliding a bottled water across the counter. No charge, he said softly. Someone should have handed you this back then. Elena took it, the cool plastic grounding her. She remembered her father, his dignity stolen by cops' slurs, and how she'd sworn Maya would never know that pain. She sat where she'd stood that day, Maya on her lap, and sipped the water, each drop a closure she'd fought for. Willow Creek hadn't transformed overnight. James Callahan's trial was ongoing, his indictment a first step. Robert Hensley faced accountability, his cover-ups exposed. Clara Mendoza's community group grew, Nathan Brooks mentored new officers, and Sarah Nguyen led with a voice once silenced. The town's changes were small but real. Residents nodded to Elena on the street, a child at a school assembly spoke of courage, inspired by that day at the hearth. The system wasn't fixed, but it was listening, forced to face its flaws by Elena's unyielding truth. Maya tugged at her jacket, eyes wide. Mama, why'd you stay? Elena smiled, kissing her forehead. Because if we all leave, baby, nothing changes. A customer paused, recognizing her, and whispered, thank you. No applause, no headlines, just a quiet acknowledgement. Elena held Maya close, her father's pride and her daughter's hope intertwining. The fight wasn't over, but she'd planted a seed, and others were tending it. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you. You've walked with Elena through shame, courage, and change. If her story moved you, hit subscribe on Revenge Ties, share it, and join us, where every story is a step toward truth, justice, and a new dawn. Keep standing for what's right, and we'll meet you at the table.